Now, the powers that be don't want you to use it, and thus we've all heard of calcification. You can decalcify your pineal gland. So the Vatican know of this knowledge. They truly know of it. They cannot not know of it. And the pine cone sits on the staff of the Pope also. I've mentioned this before. What is this pineal gland that everyone's talking about, and what happens when you trigger it or activate it in meditation, as people always ask? Well, the pineal gland is a very interesting organ in your body, or gland as it is, and it's actually filled with fluid, and surrounded around there are very similar structures to that of the retina of the eye. Now, something which is very, very interesting about the pineal is that it's connected to the same sensory visual part of your brain as what your two eyes are. Now, inside this fluid, they say there are small crystals. And of course, the pineal gland is light reactive, but it is stimulated by darkness. Science has shown us that in darkness, the pineal is stimulated. This is why we dream at nighttime. When the eyes are closed, your pineal is the thing that conjures these dreams into.
The pineal gland is a neuroendocrine transducer, secreting melatonin responsible for physiological circadian rhythm control. A new form of biomineralization has been studied in the human pineal gland and consists of small crystals that are less than 20 microns in length. These crystals are responsible for electromechanical, biological transduction mechanism in the pineal gland due to the structure and piezoelectric properties. That's a lot of words to digest, but let's break it down into two meaningful points. The key words here are piezoelectric properties and transducer. The piezoelectric effect occurs when you apply pressure to certain materials, and that mechanical stress is changed into an electrical charge. To put it in simple terms, the pineal gland contains calcite crystals made of calcium, carbon, and oxygen, and because of their structure, they express this effect. Like an antenna, the pineal gland has the capacity to become electrically activated and generate electromagnetic fields that can tune into information. That's point number one. In addition, in the same way an antenna pulsates a rhythm or frequency to match the frequency of an incoming signal, the pineal gland receives information carried on invisible electromagnetic fields. Since all frequency carries information, once the antenna connects to the exact signal of the electromagnetic field, there must be a way to convert and descramble that signal into a meaningful message. That's exactly what a transducer does, and that's the second point. A transducer is anything that receives a signal in the form of one type of energy and converts it into a signal in another form. Take a moment to look around you. The space you are sitting in is filled with TV, radio, and Wi-Fi waves that are all different frequency ranges of invisible electromagnetic energy. You can't see any of them with your eyes, but they're still there. For example, the antenna that picks up a range of frequencies carrying a signal to your TV is transduced into a picture on your TV screen. When you tune into an FM station, you are tuning your antenna to a specific electromagnetic frequency. The information carried in that frequency range is then transduced into a coherent signal, which is the music you hear with your ears. The study I quoted says the pineal gland is a neuroendocrine transducer, capable of receiving and converting signals within the brain. When the pineal gland acts as a transducer, it can pick up frequencies above our three-dimensional space-time, sensory-based reality. Once the pineal gland is activated, it can tune into higher dimensions of this space and time, and like a TV, it can then turn the information carried on those frequencies into vivid imagery and surreal, lucid, transcendental experiences in our mind, including profoundly heightened multisensory visions beyond our vocabulary. For the pineal gland to become activated, some important things must happen. I will address them now. 1. The piezoelectric effect. Critical to creating the piezoelectric effect in the pineal gland are the calcite crystals mentioned above. Remember, these are very tiny crystals, approximately 1 to 20 microns in length. To put this in context, their size can range anywhere from 1/100th to 1/4 the width of a human hair. For the most part they are octahedron, hexahedron, and rhombohedron in shape. The purpose of the breathing technique we do before many meditations is to pull the mind out of the body by liberating potential energy stored as emotions in the lower 3 energy centers. As we inhale and contract those intrinsic muscles, follow our breath from the perineum, all the way up our spine to the top of our head, and then hold our breath and squeeze those muscles more. We're increasing intrathecal pressure. This is the internal pressure created when you push up against your insides. For example, when you hold your breath and lift something heavy. The word piezoelectric is derived from the Greek words piezein, which means to squeeze or press, and piezo, which means to push. When you do this, you are pushing cerebrospinal fluid up against the pineal gland, exerting mechanical stress on it. This mechanical stress translates into an electrical charge, and it's this exact action that compresses the stacked crystals in the pineal gland and creates a piezoelectric effect. The crystals of the pineal gland generate an electric charge in response to the stress you're applying. One of the unique characteristics of the piezoelectric effect is that it's reversible, meaning that the materials exhibiting the direct piezoelectric effect, the crystals, also exhibit a converse piezoelectric effect. Once the crystals in the gland are compressed and are creating an electrical charge, the electromagnetic field that is emanating from the pineal gland causes the crystals in it to stretch as the field increases. When the crystals generating the electromagnetic field reach their limit and can stretch no further, they contract and the electromagnetic field reverses direction and moves inward toward the pineal gland. When the electromagnetic field reaches the pineal gland crystals, it compresses them again, producing yet another electromagnetic field. This cycle of expanding and reversing the field perpetuates a pulsating electromagnetic field. When we inhale through our nose and at the same time squeeze our intrinsic muscles, we accelerate the cerebrospinal fluid into the brain. As we follow the movement of energy to the top of our head, then hold our breath and squeeze, we are increasing intrathecal pressure. The increased pressure moves the cerebrospinal fluid from the fourth ventricle, through a small canal into the third ventricle. At the same time, fluid traveling around the cerebellum compresses the crystals of the pineal gland. By increasing the intrathecal pressure, you funnel a greater volume of fluid into the chamber of the third ventricle, as well as from the space around the cerebellum. So when you hold your breath and squeeze, this extra volume of fluid exerts pressure from both directions up against the crystals, causing them to compress and create the piezoelectric effect. Now the pineal gland becomes a pulsating antenna, capable of picking up subtler and subtler, faster electromagnetic frequencies. This is the first event that must take place to activate the pineal gland. 2. The pineal gland releases its metabolites. On the surface of the pineal gland are tiny hairs called cilia, Latin for eyelashes. The action of the accelerated fluid moving faster than normal through the chambers of the ventricular system tickles the tiny hairs, which overstimulates the pineal gland. Because the pineal gland is shaped like a phallus, the stimulation produced by the acceleration of fluid moving past it, combined with the electrical activation created by an increase in intrathecal pressure in a closed system, causes the gland to ejaculate some very profound, upgraded metabolites of melatonin into the brain. The tiny cilia of the pineal gland become stimulated as the cerebrospinal fluid accelerates through the ventricular system. 3. Energy is delivered directly to the brain. Much like sending a rocket ship into space, overcoming gravity to get it off the ground is the part that requires the most energy, so to move that energy from our lower centers demands a great deal of intensity and effort. As you know by now, every time you perform the breath, you send charged particles up the spinal column. As these particles increase in velocity and acceleration, they create what's known as an inductance field. This inductance field reverses the flow of two-way information that typically facilitates communication from the brain to the body, and the body to the brain. Much like a vacuum, the inductance field draws the energy from those lower centers, energy involved with orgasm, consumption, digestion, fight or flight stress, and control, and delivers it directly to the brain stem in a spiraling motion. As the energy travels up through each vertebra, it passes the nerves that run from the spinal cord to different parts of the body, and some of that energy is then transferred through the peripheral nerves that affect the tissues and organs of the body. The current that runs along these nerve channels activates the body's meridian system, resulting in all the other systems of the body getting more energy. As energy is released from the body to the brain, it passes by each spinal nerve, exiting between each vertebra. The excitation of this system further switches on the peripheral nerves, which then transfer more energy to different tissues and organs in the body. As a result, more energy is delivered throughout the body. Once the energy reaches the brainstem, it must pass through the reticular formation. It's the job of the reticular formation to constantly edit information going from the brain to the body, as well as from the body to the brain. This formation is part of a system called the reticular activating system, which is responsible for levels of wakefulness. For instance, when you wake up from a deep sleep because you hear a sound in your house, it's the RAS that alerts you and arouses you. That's its rudimentary function. However, as the sympathetic nervous system is activated and merges with the parasympathetic nervous system. Instead of depleting the body's stored energy, it releases that energy back to the brain. Once this energy reaches the brainstem, the thalamic gate opens like a door and energy moves through the reticular formation to the thalamus, where it relays information to the neocortex. Now the reticular formation is open, and you experience greater levels of awareness. In a sense, you become more conscious and awakened. Think of the thalamus as a big train station with tracks leading to the higher centers of the brain. That's how the brain goes into gamma brainwave patterns. Right between each thalamus, located in the midbrain, sits the tiny pinecone-shaped pineal gland, facing the back of the brain. As a side note, there are two individual thalami in the midbrain, one on each side, which feed each hemisphere in the neocortex. The pineal gland sits right between them, facing the back of the brain. When the energy reaches each thalamic junction, remember the thalamus is like a relay station to all other parts of the brain. These thalami send a message directly to the pineal gland to secrete its metabolites into the brain. The effect is that the thinking neocortex becomes aroused and goes into higher brainwave patterns, like gamma. The nature of those chemical derivatives of melatonin relaxes the body, and at the same time awakens the mind. When energy moves from the body to the brain, a torus field is created around the body. When the pineal gland becomes activated, a reverse torus field of electromagnetic energy moving in the opposite direction draws energy through the top of the head, into the body, from the unified field. Since energy is frequency, and frequency carries information, the pineal gland transduces that information into vivid imagery. When your pineal gland is awakened, because it is picking up higher frequencies, these higher energies alter the chemistry of melatonin. The higher the frequency, the greater the alteration. It's this translation of information into chemistry that primes you for those transcendental, mystical moments. This is why I like to call the pineal gland an alchemist, because it transmutes melatonin into some very profound, radical neurotransmitters. As higher frequencies and higher states of consciousness interact with the pineal gland, one of the first things to happen is that these frequencies transmute melatonin into chemicals called benzodiazepines. Benzodiazepines are a class of drugs, from which Valium is created, that anesthetize the analytical mind, so all of a sudden the thinking brain relaxes and stops analyzing. According to functional brain scans, benzodiazepines suppress neural activity in the amygdala, the brain's survival center. This limits chemicals that cause you to feel fear, anger, agitation, aggression, sadness, or pain. Now your body feels calm and relaxed, but your mind is awakened. Another chemical created from melatonin produces a class of very powerful antioxidants called pinolines. Pinolines are important because they attack free radicals, which harm your cells and cause aging. These antioxidants are anti-cancer, anti-aging, anti-heart disease, anti-stroke, anti-neurodegenerative, anti-inflammatory, and antimicrobial. That's a perfect formula to upgrade melatonin's normal role as an antioxidant to the role of a supercharged antioxidant that further restores and heals the body to a greater degree than the melatonin molecule normally does. If you take that molecule and tweak it again into a cousin of melatonin, you find the same chemical that makes animals hibernate. When melatonin, which makes us sleepy and dreamy, alters just slightly into this more powerful molecule, it carries a message to extend rest and repair even further. Because the body is no longer the mind, we temporarily lose our interest in the outer world, and because we have no biological drives and aren't distracted with bodily needs, we're able to move more fully into the present moment and go deeply within. If you take that molecule and advance it yet again, you produce the same chemical found in electric eels, a phosphorescent, bioluminescent chemical that amplifies energy in the nervous system. This chemical can be powerful enough to cause a significant shock. Just imagine an electric eel that literally lights up with energy when it gets stimulated. That's what happens in the brain when it gets activated. Not only does this phosphorescent, bioluminescent chemical increase the energy in the brain, but it enhances the imagery the mind internally perceives so that everything looks as though it's made of vivid, surreal, luminescent light. As a result, people have reported experiencing colors they've never seen before, because they exist outside their known experience of the visible light spectrum. These colors appear as profound, otherworldly glowing lights in a technicolor, lucid, opalescent world of suspended beauty. Everything appears as if it's emitting beautiful light made of vivid, radiant energy that you can feel. Alter melatonin one more time and you produce the chemical dimethyltryptamine, one of the most powerful hallucinogenic substances known to man. When ayahuasca or other plant chemicals containing this molecule are ingested, the body receives only DMT, but when the pineal gland is activated, it receives the whole blend of aforementioned chemicals, and this causes some very profound inner experiences. Some of these experiences have been reported to create profound time dilation, where time appears infinite. Time travel, journeys to paranormal realms, visions of complex geometric patterns, encounters with spiritual beings, and other mystical interdimensional realities. Now, because the pineal gland is activated, we can pick up higher frequencies, which in turn produces a change in chemistry. The higher the frequency we pick up, the more it alters our chemistry, which means the more visual, hallucinogenic, and higher energy experiences we have. The crystals in our pineal gland, acting like a cosmic antenna, are the doorway to these higher vibrational realms of light and information.
My interest in explaining this mystical science of the pineal gland is really thinking of the pineal gland as the brain's radio receiver. And it can only be activated through a certain process. When this latent system switches on, the arousal that's created is energy moving from the body right up into the brain. And that energy rushes all the way up into the pineal gland. The moment that happens, the brain goes into what's called gamma brainwave patterns. They're having a full-on sensory experience without their senses. And whatever's going on between their ears, the vision that they're having, they're not visualizing. It's happening to them. And the person now is literally in a whole nother world. They're in another dimension. That's why the pineal gland is called the third eye, because it's a profound vision. Once the autonomic nervous system switches on and it goes into gamma brainwave patterns, that radio receiver has tiny little calcite crystals, stacked rhombohedrons that are on top of each other. And those crystals begin to shimmer. They begin to oscillate. And now the radio receiver is activated. And when the brain latches on to a frequency, the pineal gland acts as a transducer. And the pineal gland begins to release upgraded versions of melatonin. Melatonin already causes us to dream, but now you're going to really dream. It already causes us to relax, but now you're going to make a benzodiazepine. You are going to chill way out. You are no longer going to be in survival. Melatonin's already an antioxidant, but you're going to make two of the most powerful antioxidants known to man. Anti-cancer, anti-aging, anti-heart disease, anti-stroke, anti-neurodegenerative, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial. And then you make that one amazing chemical called dimethyltryptamine. And that begins to switch on. And what happens is you no longer move through space to experience time. You move through times. And you experience dimensions or spaces. And the biggest lie that we've ever been told is that we're linear beings living a linear life. We are dimensional beings living a dimensional life. And when the doors of dimension open to you, and you get a glimpse of how big this really is, you are going to care less about politics. You're going to care less about who's famous and who isn't, because you're going to realize you're all of that and more. We have people that have switched this system, this latent system on, and they have a greater understanding of who they really are.
In the brain, in the cranium, there is the cerebrum. And in the cerebrum, and in particular the claustrum is sitting right there in the middle of the head, virtually. From the claustrum there is a secretion, brain fluid. And this fluid is an oil. And in ancient times, this fluid was called, in Greek, it's called Christos. It's called the Christ. It's this beautiful fluid which comes from the cerebrum and pours down the spinal cord. It goes down the spinal cord and it reaches the sacral plexus, right next door to the sacrum, which are the 5 second bottommost fused vertebrae bones at the bottom of the spinal column. The bottommost portion of the spinal column is called the coccyx. Then just above that is the sacrum. 5 fused bones. So the sacral plexus is connected to the sacrum. And the fluid which comes from the cerebrum pours down the spinal cord and comes to the bottommost part of the spinal cord. Now, the claustrum is otherwise known as the holy claustrum, simply because of this beautiful oil, this Christos, that is produced and secreted. You see, the word secret comes from secretion, because this secretion is a secret. And the sacrum is the sacred part of the secret. As the secretion pours down the spinal cord and reaches the sacrum, this is the marvelous way in which our body has been designed. And the spinal cord is basically just an extension of the brain. It also does thinking. And you see, the holy claustrum is otherwise known as the Santa Claustrum. You see, because this fluid that goes down to the sacred plexus is a sacred fluid. And this is where the story of Santa Claus bringing presents down the chimney comes from. It's a story of physiology. And the Bible is a beautiful manual of physiological regeneration. What happens with this fluid is that every month when the moon is in the sign where your sun was when you were born, every month there is a germ or a seed planted in the solar plexus, which is just above the sacral plexus. And that germ is the oil, the Christ, which is born in Bethlehem, because the the solar plexus is otherwise known as Bethlehem, where the seed, where the Christ is born. And that seed, that oil, needs to return whence it came, in the midbrain. You see, as the oil ascends the spinal cord, the vibration of the oil of the Christ increases. And you see, first of all, the oil is differentiated in the pineal gland and the pituitary gland before it is sent down the spinal cord. And the pineal gland is the electric portion, and the pituitary gland is the magnetic portion. So the oil is differentiated and it is brought down the spinal cord via the Pingala and the Ida nerves. These are what is otherwise known as the Kundalini and the Kundabhatha. So it arrives at the sacral plexus and awaits for the germinating of the seed once a month, 12 times a year. And if we are able to transmute that seed and cause it to rise, as it rises in the spinal cord, it eventually reaches the medulla oblongata and the pons and the midbrain, and it crosses the vagus nerve, otherwise known as the pneumogastric nerve. It's a nerve which descends from the brain area, from the pineal and pituitary glands, respectively, and it feeds the lungs and the stomach. It's a network of nerves, and this network of nerves is called the tree of life. And you see, the ancients knew that this seed that is born in Bethlehem once a month is the Christ, and that if one were to abstain from sex during that period, that oil and seed would be saved, and it would rise, and it would burst through the heart chakra, through the throat chakra, and eventually the oil would arrive with its higher vibration, because you see, at the bottom, the oil has a very low vibratory rate. Whereas with proper practices, meditation, breathing, good eating, and good peaceful behavior, one is able to raise that Christ, that oil, so that it crosses the vagus nerve at the top of the spinal column, the 33 vertebrae of the spinal column. You see, because the Christ is crucified at 33 years of age. When the oil arrives at the very, very top, there awaiting is the optic thalamus, an egg-shaped organ in the middle of the head. When it crosses this pneumogastric nerve, this is called the crucifixion. The oil is not killed and destroyed, but it is magnified 1,000-fold. And the oil then touches the optic thalamus, and for 2.5 days remains in a condition that is called dead, that is considered to be dead, and then reaches the pineal gland after 2.5 days and illuminates the optic thalamus and the pineal gland. The optic thalamus was known as the light of the world by the Egyptians and the Greeks, because they knew their physiology and anatomy. And they knew that this precious oil, which descended from the claustrum, from the cerebrum, and was differentiated in the pineal and pituitary glands, and descended the spinal cord, they knew that it would ascend eventually, and that the enlightened portion of mankind were able to cause this Christ oil to ascend, so that it would ascend to the optic thalamus and cause it to be lightened. What in turn happens is that millions of brain cells that were dormant are now awakened. And you see, there are practices and there are things that are very, very detrimental about this oil, or that are detrimental to this oil. For instance, overeating and alcohol and sex practiced at the wrong time. These destroy the seed, and this is what is known as eating from the tree of life. Because you see, the ancients knew that once the oil is depleted because of riotous living, the fleshly organism dies. Death results from using up all of the oil. You see, the oil that descends from the cerebrum is known otherwise as the manna from heaven. You see, because heaven means heaved up. And the head, the cranium, the dome which sits on top of the torso, that was known as the heavens, you see. And the heart area and the heart chakra was known as the Midgard, or the middle garden. And the generative area was known as Sodom and Gomorrah, the area of desire, animal desire, you see. And otherwise known as Egypt and hell and the world, etc. Whereas the Garden of Eden and the land flowing with milk and honey, that's upstairs. In fact, the pineal gland produces the honey, a secretion known as honey, which has DMT in it, and the pituitary body secretes the milk. This is the milk and honey. And the land flowing with milk and honey is upstairs. And the sacred secret is the secret of this oil and how to rise the oil and raise it so that one is illuminated and opened up to the higher mind. As above, so below, you see. This is a sacred secret simply because the secretion which comes from the sacral plexus is one of the most important things that we need to know for physiological regeneration. You see, by saving the seed, one can actually live longer. In fact, the ancients used to live for thousands of years by protecting and keeping this secret and guarding it. The Egyptians built ascension chambers, pyramids, for this very purpose. And they taught the science of respecting and keeping and guarding and looking after this beautiful oil. And if you know the Gospels well, you will know all the scriptures that are referring to it. You see, I am the light of the world. He that follows me shall not walk in darkness. The light of the world is the optic thalamus. Keep your eye simple, for if your eye is dark, your whole body will be dark. That eye has always been known as the third eye. In fact, it's the spiritual eye. Now, as for the deniers, you see, most churchgoers will be denying this because in their mind, Jesus Christ is a historical person which must return physically in order to save them, because they cannot save themselves. They need a vicarious third-party saviour. Whereas the opposite is true. And this is what the so-called Apostle Paul was talking about when he referred to the sacred secret of the Christ within, the Christ that dwelleth within. For you see, the kingdom of God is within. It's not without. And in fact, the words of Jesus are pretty clear where it says, do not be looking out there, for the kingdom of God will not come with striking observableness. Don't look here and don't look there, because there will be deceivers saying, oh, there he is, here is the Christ, there is the Christ. Because the process is within. And unless one is able to raise that energy and get out of the bottom chakras. You see, the bottom chakras deal with sexuality, strife, envy, power, greed, wealth, and all of those things. And if one is constantly seeking those things and constantly eating of the fruit of the tree of life, you see those beautiful nerves, the pneumogastric nerve system, they are responsible for bringing the oil back up, those beautiful spiritual presence. And we are the ones who are responsible for channeling that oil, that Christ seed within, so that it eventually is crucified in the middle of the head. You see, the cerebrum is hollowed out, and the midbrain and the limbic system at the top of the spinal cord is the holy of holies. And the cerebellum, which sits at the back of the brain, this is otherwise known as the small brain. The cerebrum is associated with the top of the head, Aries, and the cerebellum is associated with Taurus, and the left brain, the male left brain. The right brain is the feminine, and it is connected to the cerebrum, Aries, the God brain. You see, we have the God man is the cerebrum, the Adam man is the cerebellum. Now, churchgoer, you won't get any of this in church. This is esoteric truth. Exoteric truth denies this and has been perpetuated for the last few thousand years by so-called Christian churches in order to deny and hide the true story of physical regeneration. In the past, people have lived for thousands of years by preserving and conserving this oil and transmuting it so that it reaches the optic thalamus. You see, what happens when the oil reaches the optic thalamus is that new blood is generated in the body. Until such time as this process has occurred, we will have old, toxic blood in our physical organisms. And in order to regenerate and produce new blood, the oil must be raised to the optic thalamus, and healing can occur. And as I said before, the millions of dormant brain cells are reactivated. And the heavens, the cerebrum, were awaiting the return of the prodigal son. You see, because we all have these dormant brain cells in our brains. Yes, because they have not returned any of the oil. And in the Bible, this is known as tithing. You see, this is why the Bible says you must return 1/10 to the Lord. Remember, the Lord, the L-O-R-D, refers to the gold. You see, this is how we turn lead into gold. Our spinal cord is like a thermometer. And as the mercury rises with warmth, the more so with enlightenment and consciousness and knowledge, we are able to raise the condition of this oil. And as it climbs the spine and ascends, it raises its vibration. In fact, when it gets crucified at the top of the spine where the pneumogastric nerve is crossed, this does not mean death. This means, crucifixion means to multiply 1,000-fold. And you see, not only is physical regeneration a result of this, but also spiritual regeneration. And one is able to experience the higher mind and clairvoyance. You see, mediumship occurs down in the solar plexus. There are 4 brains in the human body. The cerebrum, what is otherwise known as the God brain, the cerebellum, which is the man brain, the medulla oblongata, which is responsible for the involuntary actions in the body, such as breathing and blood circulation. And the 4th brain is the solar plexus, which is more related to the animal instinctive brain, which receives images from the ether, from the air, you see, just like the animals do, and they react correspondingly without reason and logic, instinctively. So you see, this is why it is so important to raise the oil, so that one can get out of the lower mind. The lower mind is the solar plexus, and wrought with problems. You see, ascension is within. One ascends to heaven, the heaved up place, the dome of the cerebrum. You see, those 2 flaps, those hollowed out hemispheres of the cerebrum, are otherwise known as the cherubim. You see, in the Bible, God says to Moses, you must build the Ark of the Covenant with 2 cherubim above the Ark, covering over. And inside the Ark shall be placed the manna and the law of God, the 2 tablets. Well, I'm here to tell you that the optic thalamus is the Ark of the Covenant. And the limbic system and the midbrain, the pons, the medulla oblongata, the pineal gland, these are the Holy of Holies. This is where one needs to return the good oil. The secret of secrets. This has been known to the ancients. It's in the Bible. It's in all of the legendary books. All of the characters, all of them, they are all in the body. In the middle of the head, there is something known as the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the little horse. This is the white horse that Jesus rides upon. There is something known as Ammon's horn. Yeah, absolutely. Ammon's horn in the middle of the head. Ammon's horn? Goodness me. Would that be in Jesus' name, Ammon, the same dude? Yeah, it would. We have the claustrum. We have the cerebrum, the covering angels, the cherubim, which cover over, because the cerebrum covers over the cerebellum and the midbrain and the optic thalamus and the pineal gland and the pituitary gland, otherwise known as Joseph and Mary. You see, these 2 are the ones that are responsible for sending the oil down the spine, down the spinal cord. And they are the ones that await the return of their son, who is born in Bethlehem, the solar plexus, once a month. Once a month, when the moon is in the sun sign that you were born under. This is why astrology is so crucial. You see, living riotously, overeating, consuming too much alcohol, these are poisons to the oil. These dry up the oil. And once the oil is dried up, the human organism dies. It cannot live without the oil that comes from the cerebrum. This beautiful fluid, the crystalline dew, which comes from the heaved up place, the heaven, and it comes down to the sacrum, the secretion, which is the secret, the sacred secret of the Christ within. I have graphs showing all the body parts that correspond to the Holy Land. The Holy Land is within, people. The Holy Land is the body. The Jordan River is the spinal cord. You see, Jesus gets baptized at the age of 30 and crucified at the age of 33. These correspond to the bones of the vertebrae. And as we progress with that oil by degree, we get our degrees. You see, we graduate with high honours and degrees. The degrees are referring to the spinal cord. And if we stay in the sacrum, sacred though it is, we do not ever climb Jacob's ladder to the place which Jacob called Peniel. You see, in Genesis, Jacob laid his head upon a stone. That stone is the 5 fused bones of the sacrum, where the seed is born. And if we are able to wrestle with the angel, as Jacob did, and he got a name change to Israel, then we are able to see God face to face, because that's what Jacob did when he climbed the ladder. And he called the place Peniel. Interesting. Peniel sounds like pineal. Well, it is, because Jacob says, "For I have seen God face to face, and I have lived." So, folks, please pay heed to this beautiful science of physical regeneration and spiritual regeneration. Raise the Christ, raise the oil, ascend within, for the ones who are looking for ascension and the rapture without are deluded and will be deluded. Thank you for listening.
And she's buying a stairway to heaven.